My grandmother has been blind since she was 53 years old. She'll be 81 in April. That's 28 years of navigating a world that wasn't built for her. 28 years of learning to read a room without seeing it. 28 years of developing a kind of perception that most sighted people will never understand, and that I, having grown up watching her, have spent my whole life trying to learn from. She said Lara was beautiful the first time she heard her voice. Not after touching her face. Not after months of getting to know her. After one sentence. Lara had walked into my grandmother's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon in October and said, "Something smells incredible in here. Is that cardamom?" And my grandmother, who was stirring something at the stove, with the practiced confidence of someone who has cooked by feel and smell and memory for decades, turned toward the voice and said, without hesitation, "This one is beautiful, Ezra." I was standing in the doorway. Lara was standing 3 feet inside the kitchen. There was a silence that lasted approximately 2 seconds and felt significantly longer. Lara looked at me. I looked at my grandmother. My grandmother went back to stirring. That is where this story starts. But the story behind it, the one that explains why Lara was in my grandmother's kitchen on a Sunday in October, and what my grandmother meant, and why she was right, that story starts 4 months earlier, with a broken elevator and a very large box. Before I tell you the rest, I want to stop and ask you something. Because what my grandmother said in that kitchen is the kind of thing that either makes complete sense to you or sounds like something from a movie, and I want to know which camp you're in. Can you tell something about a person from their voice alone, before you've seen them, before you know anything about them, in the first sentence they speak? Do you think that kind of perception is real, or do we just tell ourselves stories about it afterward to make the coincidences feel like wisdom? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story already has you, hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds and it means everything. Because what my grandmother heard in Lara's voice, and what I was only beginning to understand by October, is the whole point. My name is Ezra. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a sound engineer at a mid-sized recording studio in Nashville called Blue Thread. I work mostly on the mixing side. I sit in a room full of speakers and knobs, and I listen to music with a precision that most people reserve for emergencies, and I make it sound like what it was trying to be. It's the kind of work that requires a specific tolerance for repetition and an even more specific relationship with sound. The way a note sits in a space, the way a voice carries, what happens in the half-second of silence before a chorus hits. I hear things. That is, more than anything else, what I do. I live in a 4-story building called the Harwick on the east side of Nashville. It has an elevator that works approximately 70% of the time, which I have made peace with because the apartment on the 4th floor has a window that faces west, and the afternoon light through it is the specific shade of gold that makes whatever I'm doing feel like it matters. I moved in 3 years ago, and I have turned down 2 reasonable offers to move somewhere newer because I am, apparently, a person who forms attachments to light. Lara moved into the apartment directly below mine, 3rd floor, apartment 3C, on a Tuesday in June. I know it was a Tuesday because I was working from home that day, and I heard the elevator stop working at approximately 2 in the afternoon, which meant that whoever was moving in on the 3rd floor was going to have to use the stairs, which meant that the moving in sounds were going to be louder and more drawn out than they would otherwise have been, which meant that I was going to hear everything. I heard everything. I heard the specific sound of heavy boxes being set down hard on a landing. I heard someone, a woman, from the voice, saying things under her breath in the measured tone of someone who was frustrated but had decided not to be dramatic about it. I heard what sounded like a very large piece of furniture attempting to negotiate a 90-degree turn in a stairwell and not succeeding on the first 3 attempts. On the 4th attempt, I went downstairs. She was on the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors, with one end of a very large bookshelf and no one holding the other end. She was maybe 28 or 29, dark curly hair pulled back with the specific urgency of someone who had been moving furniture for several hours. The expression of someone who had been managing a problem alone for long enough that being helped was going to require a brief recalibration. "Other end?" I said. She looked at me for 1 second, then, "Please." We got the bookshelf up the remaining flight and through the door of 3C in about 4 minutes. which was significantly faster than the previous attempts had apparently been going. When we set it down, she straightened up and pushed her hair back and looked at me with the expression of someone who had been operating at capacity and was now fractionally below it. "Ezra," I said, "4th floor." "Lara," she said, "obviously 3rd floor." "Obviously," I said. "The elevator," she said. 70%, I said, "on good weeks." She looked at the bookshelf, then at me. "Is the rest of the building like that?" "The hot water is consistent," I said. "The light is exceptional." She looked at me for a moment, with an expression I couldn't immediately classify. "Okay," she said, and then, "Thank you for the bookshelf. Welcome to the Harwick," I said. I went back upstairs. I sat at my desk. I went back to what I had been doing, which was editing a vocal track for a session that had gone long the previous week, and I put on my headphones and I listened to a woman's voice sing the same 4 bars 17 times, and I thought about how the voice in the stairwell had sounded. Not in any particular way, just the note of it. The specific quality of someone managing something alone and accepting help with the exact amount of grace that the situation called for. Not more, not less. I noted this in the way I noted sounds. Filed it. Moved on. Over the following weeks, I learned Lara through the building the way you learn your neighbors, through the details of proximity. She was a graphic designer who worked from home most days. I knew this because her schedule was regular in the specific irregular way of someone without a commute, and because I occasionally heard music through the floor at the hours when people who work from home take breaks. She cooked in the evenings. She had a cat that I heard exactly once, a brief and decisive sound from somewhere in 3C that was never repeated. She went running early on Saturday mornings, which I knew because I was often awake at that hour for work reasons, and I heard the specific sound of someone leaving a building with athletic purpose. I did not seek her out. She did not seek me out. We passed each other in the hallway perhaps twice a week and said the things you say to neighbors in hallways, and I thought about the voice in the stairwell intermittently in the way you think about sounds that have landed in a specific register and stayed there. In August, 3 things happened. The first was that she knocked on my door at 11 on a Thursday night because a pipe under her kitchen sink had started making a sound that she described as alarming, and which turned out to be a precursor to a slow leak that the building's plumber addressed the following morning. I turned off the water at the main valve in her kitchen so the sound would stop and she could sleep, and she made me tea because she said turning off someone's water at 11 p.m. deserved at least that. And we sat at her kitchen table for 40 minutes, and talked in the way that 2 people sometimes talk, when circumstances have put them in a room, at an unusual hour, and neither of them has any particular reason to leave. I learned she had been in Nashville for 8 months, having moved from Cincinnati for a job that had ended 2 months after she arrived, which she described with the specific dry humor of someone who had processed it enough to be funny about it. She had stayed because she had started building something of her own, the freelance work, the clients she was accumulating, the specific shape of a life being constructed deliberately rather than received. She was making it work. She said this not as reassurance but as information. She learned I had been at Blue Thread for 4 years, having come from a smaller studio in Memphis, where I learned the technical side, and from a family where I had learned to hear things, my grandmother being the primary teacher of that, in ways I would have to explain at length. "Explain at length," she said. So I told her about my grandmother, about the blindness that arrived when my grandmother was 53, from a condition that moved fast and completely, about how she had, in the years since, developed a relationship with sound and touch and smell that had given her what she described as a second vision, slower and more specific and without the shortcuts that sighted people use to process the world too quickly, about how growing up around that had given me ears, the way she put it, had made me someone who listened before he looked. Lara was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "She sounds like someone I'd like to know." "Everyone says that," I said. "She's usually correct about it." The second thing that happened in August was that Lara and I started having dinner together approximately once a week, on no particular night, by a process of accumulation rather than arrangement. One of us would smell something the other was cooking and knock on the door, Or one of us would have more of something than needed for one person and bring the extra upstairs or downstairs as the case required. It began without being decided and continued without being defined, which was its own kind of information that I was not yet reading clearly. The third thing that happened in August was that my grandmother called and said she was coming to visit in October and asked if I had anyone she should meet. I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "You know what it means, Ezra." "I'll think about it," I said. "You've already thought about it," she said. "You're just deciding whether to tell me." She was, as she almost always is, correct. My grandmother's name is Adeline. She lives in Memphis in the house she has lived in for 40 years, which she knows so completely that she moves through it at full speed without a cane, touching nothing, the layout of it as present in her body as breathing. She visits Nashville twice a year and stays in the guest room of my apartment, and we go to the farmer's market on Saturday morning, and she holds things and smells things, and I describe what I can see, and she describes what I am missing, which is usually more. We have been doing this for 12 years, since I moved to Tennessee, and it is the thing I look forward to most in any given year. She arrived on a Friday evening in October by train. She travels by train because she says air travel is acoustically hostile and she prefers to hear the country passing. I picked her up at the station and we went to the apartment and she walked through the rooms the way she always does on the first evening, remapping them with her hands, noting what had changed, what hadn't. She found the new lamp by the window after 3 seconds without being told it was there. "Something's different on this floor," she said. "New rug," I said. She bent and touched it. "Nice," she said. The other one was tired. On Saturday, we went to the farmer's market. On Sunday, I made lunch, and something was supposed to happen in the afternoon that she had planned. A phone call with an old friend, and Lara knocked on the door at 1:30 with a jar of something she said she had made too much of and thought I might want. I opened the door. My grandmother was in the kitchen. I said, "Lara, this is my grandmother Adeline." "Grandma, this is my neighbor Lara." Lara walked into the kitchen and said, "Something smells incredible in here. Is that cardamom?" My grandmother said, "This one is beautiful, Ezra." The 2 seconds of silence. Lara looking at me looking at my grandmother stirring. Lara said carefully, "Thank you." My grandmother said, "Sit down. You'll stay for lunch." It was not a question. Lara sat down. I sat down. My grandmother served lunch with the precision of someone who knows exactly where everything is and does not need to see it to place it correctly, and Lara watched this without making anything of it, which I noted as its own kind of information. Over lunch, my grandmother asked Lara questions the way she asked everyone questions, directly, specifically, without small talk as a buffer. She asked what Lara did and what she was building and where she had come from and what she had left behind. She asked about the cat, having apparently heard the single decisive sound I had heard through the floor. She asked about the bookshelf, because I had told her about the Tuesday in June without realizing I was telling her something. Lara answered everything directly, which was the only way to answer my grandmother, who could hear evasion in the same register she heard everything else. At one point, my grandmother reached across the table and took Lara's hand. Not dramatically, practically, the way she often reached for things to understand them. She held Lara's hand for a moment, her thumb moving across the back of it in the specific way she had of reading things through touch. "Your hands are working hands," she said, "but you're being careful with them." Lara looked at me. I gave her nothing. I didn't know where this was going either. "I have a condition in my right hand," Lara said slowly. "Tendinitis. I'm trying not to overuse it." "You're a designer," my grandmother said. "The computer." "Yes," Lara said. "You need to stop fighting it and start accommodating it," my grandmother said. Fighting things that are wrong with your body is for people who think their body is separate from them. It isn't. Lara sat with this for a moment. Then she said, "That's the most useful thing anyone has said to me about this in 6 months." My grandmother released her hand. "Good," she said. "Now tell me about Cincinnati." After lunch, Lara helped wash up, insisted, in the specific way of someone who means it, and my grandmother let her, because she could tell she meant it. They stood at the sink together, my grandmother washing and Lara drying, and they talked about Cincinnati and Nashville and what it meant to build something after a plan failed. And I sat at the kitchen table and listened and heard, without anyone saying it in those words, two people recognizing each other. When Lara left, 2 hours after she had arrived with a jar of something she had made too much of, my grandmother came and sat at the kitchen table and said, "Well, I said. "She has a voice that listens," my grandmother said. "Do you know what I mean?" "I think so," I said. "Most people talk with their voice and listen with their ears," she said. "She listens with her voice. The way she asked about the cardamom, the way she answered my questions, the sound of someone who is paying attention with their whole self." I thought about the stairwell in June, the note of the voice, the exact amount of grace. "I know," I said. My grandmother looked in my direction. She always looked toward where she knew I was, had mapped me in the room the way she mapped everything. "You've known for a while," she said. "I've been filing it," I said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to it. "Sound engineers," she said. "You file everything and mix it later." "It's a process," I said. "Ezra," she said. "Yeah. Stop filing," she said. I looked at the kitchen table, at the space where Lara had been sitting 2 hours before, at the jar of whatever she had made too much of, which was still on the counter, which she had apparently forgotten, which meant she would have to come back for it, or I would have to bring it down, and either way there was a reason to knock on a door. "Okay," I said. "This week," my grandmother said. "Yes," I said. "Not next week," she said. "I heard you," I said. She smiled. "Good," she said. "You have good ears. Use them." I brought the jar down to 3C that evening. Lara opened the door and saw it and said, "I forgot that." "You did," I said. She took the jar. She looked at it. She looked at me. "Your grandmother," she said. "Yeah?" "She's extraordinary," she said. "I know," I said. "What she said," Lara said. "At the beginning, when she was right," I said. "She usually is. I should have said so in the moment, and I didn't." Lara looked at me for a long moment. The hallway was the specific quiet of a Sunday evening in a building where people are winding down the weekend. The light from her apartment was warm behind her. "What does she hear?" Lara said. "When she says someone is beautiful, what is she actually hearing?" I thought about how to answer this. "The quality of a person's attention," I said. "The way they take up space in a room, sonically, not volume, presence. Whether their voice is doing the same thing as their face." She says most people have a gap between those things, a performance gap. "And she heard no gap in me," Lara said. "In the first sentence," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "That's the kindest thing anyone has said about me in a long time," she said. "And it came from someone who has never seen me." "She saw you," I said, "just not with her eyes." Lara looked at me. The warm light from her apartment was doing something to the hallway. I was a sound engineer who listened before he looked, and I had been filing this woman's voice since June, and my grandmother had taken 12 seconds to arrive at what I had been slowly accumulating for 4 months. And I thought, she said, "Stop filing. Can I take you to dinner?" I said, not as neighbors, as a question. Lara looked at the jar in her hand, then at me. "Yes," she said. "Thursday?" I said. "Thursday," she said. I went back upstairs. I sat at my desk. I did not put on my headphones. I sat in the quiet of my apartment with the west-facing window going dark outside, and I thought about my grandmother at 53, the day the site went, and how she had told me once, I was 12, she was 61, that losing her eyes had been the beginning of learning to pay attention correctly. That she had spent 53 years looking at things, and only after she stopped could she hear what they were actually saying. I thought about a voice in a stairwell in June, a note I had filed and kept. I thought about beautiful, what it meant when someone without eyes said it, what it was pointing at, what it had always been pointing at, and which sighted people often missed because they were looking at the wrong frequency. I thought about Thursday. I texted my grandmother, "Thursday." She replied, 3 minutes later, a single word, "Good." Thursday was dinner at a restaurant on the east side that Lara had been meaning to try since July. which she told me when I picked her up at 3C, and which I filed as information about how long some things had been accumulating without being said. Dinner was 3 hours. We talked about sound and design and what it meant to do work that required a specific kind of attention and how that attention bled into the rest of life, in ways that were sometimes difficult and usually worth it. She told me about the tendinitis, with a specificity she hadn't used when my grandmother had identified it, the way it had started, how long she had been managing it, the fear underneath the management that she was still getting used to talking about. I told her about the work of listening, the way spending hours each day in precise sonic attention had changed how I moved through the world, the specific loneliness of hearing things other people didn't, and not always knowing what to do with what you heard. Like what? She said. Like the exact amount of grace in someone's voice the first time they accept help, I said. She was quiet for a moment. The bookshelf, she said. June, I said. Tuesday. She looked at me across the table. You filed it, she said. I filed it, I said. My grandmother told me to stop filing. She told you that about me specifically? She told me that this week, I said. She could have told me months ago, and been right months ago. Lara looked at her wine glass. What would you have done differently, she said, if she'd said it in June? I thought about it honestly. I would have been ahead of the understanding, I said. The filing was how I got to knowing. I don't think I could have skipped it. She looked at me. That might be the most you've ever said about yourself directly, she said. My grandmother would say I'm getting better at it, I said. Is she right? Usually, I said. On the walk home, she told me something she hadn't told me in 4 months of dinners and hallway conversations, and one late night over a kitchen sink leak. She told me that the job that had ended 2 months after she arrived in Nashville had been more than a job. It had been a relationship, the professional and personal tangled in the way they sometimes get. And when the professional had ended, the personal had ended with it, and she had stayed in Nashville, partly because leaving felt like confirming that none of it had been right, and partly because the city was beginning to feel like hers in a way that was separate from all of it. I've been building something here, she said. Deliberately. Everything in the apartment is where I put it. The clients are ones I chose. The running route is one I mapped. Nothing here is someone else's version of my life. The bookshelf, I said. She looked at me. You moved it up 4 flights of stairs alone, I said, with the elevator out. She was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. I know, I said. I heard you. She laughed. A real one, unexpected. The kind that comes before the decision to laugh, and I thought, that's the note. That's the one I've been filing since June. The one my grandmother heard in 12 seconds. The one that exists in the precise overlap between a person's voice and their face, where the performance gap is absent and what comes out is simply true. We stopped at the entrance to the Harwick. The October night was the specific cold that arrives before it commits to being cold, provisional, and clear. Your grandmother, Lara said. Yeah. She said I was beautiful without seeing me, she said. That's going to stay with me for a long time. It should, I said. What does she actually think? Lara said. About. She gestured between us, lightly. She told me Thursday by text, I said. 1 word. What word? Good, I said. Lara smiled. The October light did what it did. I had good ears, and I had been using them since June, and this was the moment that the filing resolved into something I could finally hear clearly. Not because it had arrived, but because I had finally stopped processing it and started being in it. Good, she said, and it meant the same thing it had meant when my grandmother sent it, which was, yes, which was, now, which was, what took you? It is March now, 5 months after the Sunday in October. My grandmother came back in February, her second visit of the year, and on the Saturday we went to the farmer's market, and Lara came with us. My grandmother held Lara's right hand for a moment, the way she had at the October lunch, and then said, better. Lara looked at me. The tendinitis, I said. You've been accommodating it, my grandmother said, not fighting. I have, Lara said. Good, my grandmother said, and moved to the next stall, already identifying a jar of something by smell. Lara looked at me sideways. She's going to be right about everything, isn't she? She said. not a question. Yes, I said. I should have told you at the beginning. You told me she usually was, she said. I undersold it, I said. She laughed. That same note, the one I have been hearing since June, and will hear, I am fairly certain, for a very long time. My grandmother, 3 stalls ahead, turned her head toward the sound. I saw her smile. She heard it too. That is the whole story. A blind woman, and a voice in a kitchen, and a word she said, without hesitation, about someone she had never seen. And a man who files sounds for a living and took 4 months to understand what he had been hearing since a Tuesday in June with a broken elevator and a very large bookshelf. She was beautiful. My grandmother heard it in 12 seconds. I heard it in 4 months. She was right first. She usually is. I want to tell you something about my grandmother that I haven't told you yet, because it belongs at the end of this story rather than the beginning, and because I wasn't sure until recently that I understood it well enough to say it correctly. When she lost her sight at 53, she told me, much later, when I was old enough to ask the right question, that the thing she had grieved most was not the darkness. The darkness arrived, and she adapted to it, the way she adapted to everything, with the specific patience of someone who believes adaptation is not loss but change. What she had grieved was the looking. The quick glance across a room that gave you everything you needed. The shortcut. Sighted people use their eyes to skip, she told me. You look at a face and you decide you understand it. You look at a room and you think you know it. The eyes give you so much so fast that you forget to use everything else. You stop listening. You stop feeling the temperature of a space. You stop hearing what's actually being said underneath what's being said. She looked toward me. Always toward where I was, always accurate. I lost the shortcut, she said. I had to learn the long way, which it turns out is the better way. I have been a sound engineer for 8 years. I have spent those years in rooms training my ears to hear what is actually there, rather than what I expect to be there, which is the essential skill of the work. Not hearing the music, hearing the sound the music is making. Those two things are not always the same. The music in your head is the shortcut. The sound in the room is the truth. My grandmother taught me this before I knew it had a professional application. She taught me by example, by being someone for whom the shortcut was unavailable, who therefore went the long way and arrived at things I was skipping past with my eyes. She heard Lara in 12 seconds. I had been hearing her for 4 months and had been filing what I heard rather than understanding it, because filing is its own kind of shortcut. The sound engineer's version of looking and deciding you understand, organizing the information instead of being in it. She told me to stop filing. What she meant, I think now, was stop organizing what you hear into something you can manage. Start letting it mean what it means. That is, when I think about it, what she has been doing for 28 years. Letting things mean what they mean, without the protection of the shortcut, without the option of glancing across a room and deciding you've seen it. Going the long way, arriving at the truth by paying attention to everything. She heard no gap in Lara's voice, no performance. No distance between what Lara's voice was doing and what Lara herself was doing. She heard someone who takes up space honestly, who sounds like themselves, who pays attention with their whole self, who does not borrow a version of themselves when they walk into a room. That, I think, is what my grandmother means when she says beautiful. Not a physical thing, a sonic thing, an honesty thing. The specific quality of someone whose presence is the same as their person. No gap, no management, no performance. Lara has tendinitis in her right hand and is learning to accommodate it rather than fight it. She moved to Nashville after a plan failed and stayed because she was building something that was hers. She carries a bookshelf up 4 flights of stairs with the elevator broken and accepts help with the exact amount of grace the situation calls for. She asks about cardamom when she walks into a kitchen, because she is paying attention with her whole self, and the smell is there, and the question is honest. No gap. My grandmother heard it. I heard it. She was right first, and faster, and with less information. I have good ears, as she says. But she has something better than good ears. She has no shortcuts. She has only the long way, which is the better way, and which arrives, consistently and without fail, at the thing that is actually true. Beautiful. Yes. 12 seconds. She was right. There is one more thing, and it is small, and it happened last week, and it is the right ending. Lara and I were at my apartment on a Wednesday evening. She was working at the kitchen table on a project, her right hand resting, her left hand doing more than its share, which she does without complaining and which I have learned to watch without remarking on, because she does not want the tendinitis to be the loudest thing in the room. I was at my desk with headphones on, finishing a mix that needed finishing. The apartment was in the specific, comfortable quiet of two people doing their own work in the same space, which is, in my experience, one of the better kinds of quiet there is. At some point I took off the headphones and the room had the quality of evening, darker outside the west window, the lamp on, the kitchen warm. Lara looked up. "Done?" she said. "Close," I said. She looked back at her screen, then back at me. "Play it," she said. "It's not finished," I said. "Play it anyway," she said. I played it through the apartment speakers, which is not how I usually listen to work in progress, which I usually keep in the headphones until I'm sure. The music filled the room. A song that had been difficult to get right, a voice that had taken weeks to place correctly, the specific chord in the second verse that had been landing wrong until yesterday. When it ended, Lara was quiet for a moment. "The second verse," she said. "Yeah," I said. "That's new," she said. "Yesterday," I said. She nodded, looked at her screen. "It's right now," she said. I looked at her at the kitchen table in the lamplight. She had not studied sound. She had not been trained to hear this way. She simply paid attention with her whole self, the way she had walked into my grandmother's kitchen and asked about cardamom, the way she had accepted help with a bookshelf, the way she answered my grandmother's questions directly and washed dishes because she meant it. No gap. She heard the second verse was right. I called my grandmother the next morning and told her. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Of course she did." "You're not surprised," I said. "Ezra," she said, "I told you she was beautiful in 12 seconds. What did you think I was talking about?" I laughed. The specific kind, surprised and real. "Use your ears," she said. "You have good ones." "I'm working on it," I said. "I know," she said. "You're getting better." She was right. She usually is. My grandmother is coming back in April for her birthday. She will be 81. We will go to the farmer's market on Saturday, the three of us, and she will hold things and smell things, and I will describe what I can see, and Lara will describe what she notices, and my grandmother will describe what she hears, which will be more than either of us. At some point she will say something correct about one of us, without warning and without effort, the way she says everything, as simple information, the long way arrived at, the shortcut unavailable so the truth instead. I have been listening since June. I am getting better at it. She heard it in 12 seconds. I hear it every day now. Beautiful. Yes, she was right. I want to say one last thing about the voice in the stairwell. On the Tuesday in June, when I went downstairs and took the other end of the bookshelf, I heard a note in Lara's voice, when she said please, that I filed immediately and have not forgotten. It was a short word, one syllable, said in the specific tone of someone who is not used to asking and has decided to ask anyway. The note of someone setting down their pride for exactly one syllable and then picking it back up, the exact amount of grace the situation called for. I filed it. Sound engineers file things. My grandmother would have heard it and known in that moment. She would have recognized it for what it was, the sound of a person being exactly themselves, no gap, no performance, just the honest acoustic of a life being built deliberately. 4 months later, she heard it in a kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. 12 seconds, one sentence, one word. Beautiful. She was not talking about a face. She was talking about a frequency, the specific frequency of someone whose voice sounds like their person, which is, when you can hear it, one of the rarest and most specific things there is. I heard it in June without knowing what I was hearing. She heard it in October and knew immediately. I know it now. And every time Lara is in the same room as me, doing her own work with her left hand carrying more of the weight, asking about cardamom, hearing the second verse get right, I hear it again. The long way. No shortcuts. Just the truth. Beautiful. She was right. She usually is.